Hi everyone, hope you're well. Today we're going to have a look at 2.4.3 ADAS equilibrium. Now if you think back to theme 1, we did supply curve, the demand curve, and then we put them together. The real crux of theme 1 is supply and demand. And the use of supply and demand is something that goes right through economics, right through microeconomics in particular. Today what we're going to do is look at the ADAS diagram, which is really the central piece of macroeconomics. You'll use it all the way through theme 2, and you'll then use it all the way through theme 4. And I can guarantee you, these diagrams that you'll see behind me, you will use in the exam. I've put up here red hot. As I say, this is a topic you must understand. Lots of economics that we can show on these diagrams, lots of economics that you've studied, economic growth, inflation, unemployment, all can be shown on these diagrams. So, what you can see, and we'll talk this through this morning, is the ADAS diagrams, but we've got two different types here. We've got the Keynesian and we've got the classical. The Keynesian has got the Keynesian LRAS, the classical has the classical LRAS. Remember, we looked at this last week. The Keynesian LRAS is where we believe that there's going to be a price level where we can't go below due to sticky wages, trade union power, so on, meaning that in the long run we won't necessarily reach this YF point, the point where the market clears and we will reach our maximum potential. Classical believes that things will change and will move, and therefore in the long run we're always at that maximum point. Now that's important because with a Keynesian diagram we are likely to have an equilibrium somewhere below. That means maybe we might need some government intervention. With a classical, there's no need because you're always at maximum. And we'll talk about what we can show now. So if you look at the diagram, we've obviously studied AD before. We did this over the last few weeks. Reminder what AD is made up of. C plus I plus G plus X minus M. So you've got C for consumption, I for investment, G for government, X minus M, which is net trade. These are the components of AD, and AD can move out and move in when these components change. We've got our long run aggregate supply, which as we say is all factors variable, and we're looking at the long run, the position of our economy, and we'd like it as economists to be somewhere near this YF. YF is maximum resources. It's the maximum potential of an economy. That requires all resources to be used, all employment to be filled and so on. So what can we show? Well, this Keynesian LRAS we can show far more. We will use this one far more than we will use classical, and we'll show you why now. Well, what can we show? Well, first point is we can show the level of output. Well, here, level of output is below YF. So we've got this gap. This gap here, we're going to study it later, it's called a negative output gap. The difference between where you are, Y0 and YF, a negative output gap, worth jotting down that negative output gap. Difference between where you are, your equilibrium, and your maximum. Well, there is no negative output gap on this diagram here because you are always at maximum. The difference between Y0 and YF also shows unemployment, so unemployment of labour. And again, Y0 to YF is your level of unemployment, and you will have studied already the types of unemployment that we might see. So your cyclical, your frictional, your structural, and so on. So that gap there will also show us unemployment. Well, over here, again, there is no unemployment. Very difficult to show when there is no unemployment. Really good EV. The classical curve is great for evaluating this topic because you can say unemployment exists, looking at my Keynes diagram from Y0 to YF. However, if you look at a classical view, it doesn't matter what you do on this diagram, you're not going to get unemployment. Up here we've got our price level, and you can see we've got roughly the same price level. I've done pretty much the same diagram here. And a change in the price level will show us the level of inflation or deflation. That we can only look at once we've made a change. So let's consider a change. Let's say that AD increases. Well, what could increase it? Consumption going up, investment going up, government spending going up, or exports going up. Not imports, obviously imports takes away. If we do that, we're going to see AD go up, go to the right, and we're going to go here, somewhere like this, AD1. And I'm going to get Y1, PL1. I look over here, my AD is going to move roughly the same to AD1, PL1, and I stay at YF. So what have I shown here? And this is where the really important bit of the diagrams come to play. So if you get a question and it says anything that relates to AD increasing, remember you've got all those bullet point components, so there's 5 of them under consumption, 7 under investment. Any of them increases, business confidence, so on, we're going to get that movement from AD to AD1. What's the economic impact? That's the important bit. Well, here we've gone an output of Y0 to Y1. That movement represents economic growth because our output, real national output, RNO, is increasing. We're seeing an increase in the output from Y0 to Y1. We've got economic growth. There is one of the big impacts. On here, well, look, we're still sat at YF. There's no impact, there's no change. Again, you could say economic growth, unlikely to occur because we are always at the maximum under a classical curve. What's happened to unemployment? Well, unemployment was Y0 to YF. It's now Y1 to YF. So unemployment has narrowed. Well, if we get an increase in demand in the economy, there's more demand for jobs. There's more people buying stuff. So we're going to get that increase in output, which means that more people enter work. So unemployment falls from Y0 to YF to Y1 to YF. Remember what we said before, unemployment is also called the negative output gap. Also falls from Y0 to YF to Y1 to YF. And again, you can see over here, we're always at max. So classical economists would say actually it doesn't matter, you're always going to be at the YF. So once we've got that movement here, well, what else has happened? Well, you can see here, big impact on price level. Impact not as big because we've got the curve here, but we've got an impact on the price level again. Think, increase in price level in an economy, what's that known as? It's known as inflation. The UK target for inflation is 2%. So the Bank of England have a target of around 2% for inflation. If it goes above 3 or below 1, then they have to explain why and what's going on, and potentially might have to use some intervention. We're going to use these diagrams to show intervention later. So we'll be looking at what could you do with an economy where AD is really low and you've got huge levels of unemployment. So we'll be considering this later. So we'll be moving AD out, AD in, and looking at the significance. So when you're looking at answering a question on here, on this on the economy, you've got your ADAS, I would always recommend you use the Keynesian LRAS because it gives you far more to talk about. The classical is useful, but much more useful as an evaluation. Other thing, go back to your macro objectives. We did this very early on. There are 7 of them. Well, you can't show them all on this diagram, but you can certainly show some of them. Economic growth shown down here, level of unemployment shown down here, level of inflation here. Well, could we have a macro conflict? If we reduce unemployment, what are we going to suffer from? Inflation. Evaluation point. If we go from Y0 to Y1 and PL to PL1 puts us above 2% in terms of inflation, then potentially we've broken one of our macroeconomic objectives, which is the problem. So these diagrams are absolutely key for you to understand the theory that we move on to and for you to be able to explain your work. I would recommend watching this video a couple of times. Jot down the key terms. So what have we spoken about in this video? Well, we've spoken about the Keynesian LRAS that you did last week and the classical. Then we've spoken about what we can show. Change in levels of unemployment or employment if you're moving to the right. Real national output or economic growth as you move to the right. We've mentioned this negative output gap, which is the same as unemployment. It's the gap between where you are and your maximum potential output, which is YF. We've spoken about inflation and obviously deflation we could talk about if AD was to fall. Loads of economics here, and this really starts to bring together all the things we've studied.